Welcome back to another episode of Teachers in Transition, the podcast and the YouTube channel. My name is Kitty Boitnott, the owner of Boitnott Coaching and the founder of Teachers in Transition. I'm a heart-centered career transition and career job search coach, specializing in working with burnt-out teachers who are ready to make a career change but don't know how or where to start. If you've listened to this podcast in the past, you know that I alternate topics each week because I'm also a certified stress management coach in addition to being a trained and experienced career transition coach. So I talk one week about career transition strategies, and on alternating weeks, I talk about stress management strategies. This week, the topic is career, and I have the pleasure of having with me a very special guest. I will be introducing you to Vicki Weber, who is a published author, former teacher turned author, and she's here today to speak to us a little bit about her transformation from teacher into the world of publishing and writing her own books and having them published by a variety of publishers, including Disney, I believe. Is that right, Vicki?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Disney and Penguin Random House.
So Vicki is a musician and a former elementary. You're not still teaching, are you?
Correct. Yeah, I'm out of the classroom as of this past August of 2021.
Okay, very good. So tell us a little bit, start out telling us a little bit about who you are and your teaching experience and what has led you up to this particular point in your life.
So I always wanted to be a teacher. I was one of those kids who, at 2-3 years old, I would take my play backpack and try sneaking on the bus with the older kids because I loved school. I loved everything about school. I loved everything about learning. And so when I was going through elementary school, I just flip-flopped what type of teacher I wanted to be. I wanted to be a math teacher, a Spanish teacher. I just knew I wanted to be a teacher. And when I got to high school, I realized that my passion was for music. So I went and got my degree in vocal music education from Millikan University.
Hang on one second. I'm going to stop. Start. Welcome back to another episode of Teachers in Transition, the podcast and the YouTube channel. My name is Kitty Boitnott. I'm the owner of Boitnott Coaching and the founder of Teachers in Transition. I'm a heart-centered career transition and job search coach who specializes in working with burnt-out teachers who are ready to make a career change but don't know how or where to start. I'm also a certified stress management coach. So on alternating weeks, I speak to stress management strategies and career transition strategies. And this week, the topic happens to be career transitions. I have the honor and pleasure of hosting a guest today, a very special guest, Vicki Weber, who is a former music teacher, now turned author, published author, and helping other young teachers who are interested in becoming authors do that with her program. And so today I want to welcome Vicki, and I want to start out, Vicki, by asking you to tell us a little bit about your previous teaching experience.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. I was definitely one of those kids who always loved learning to the point where when I was 2-3 years old, I would try sneaking on the elementary bus, when it stopped near my house. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I just changed my mind on what type of teacher. And when I reached high school, I realized that my passion was for music. So I got my degree in vocal music education from Millikan University. And then I went on to get my master's in teaching and learning with a concentration in ESL, which was really cool in the sense that it opened up a lot of opportunities. I started teaching elementary music and STEAM, as well as ESL. So my days never looked the same. And I worked with all types of kids in whole school districts or whole schools. And I did that for 6 years before I left the classroom. And part of the reason I was able to do that was because at that point I'd been published for a little over a year. I always intended it to just be something I did on the side because I wanted to, but then it blossomed into something more. And I'm really excited that I was able to take that full time.
Very good. We're still breaking up a little bit. So if we continue to have a problem, we may have to start and stop again, but we'll see how we can.
Okay.
Oh, I think yeah, sorry, that's right. Welcome back to another episode of Teachers in Transition, the podcast and the YouTube channel. My name is Vicky Boitnott. I am a heart-centered career transition and job search coach, as well as the owner of Boitnott Coaching and the founder of Teachers in Transition. I specialize in working with burnout teachers who are ready to make a career change but don't know how or where to begin. I'm also a certified stress management coach, which means that on alternating weeks, I talk about stress management strategies, and then on other weeks, I talk about career transitions. This week, I have the honor of hosting Vicki Weber, a former teacher turned author, who is going to share some information about her particular transition out of the classroom. I met Vicki through happenstance very recently and am very interested in her story and think that people will learn something and resonate with the story that she has to share today. So Vicki, welcome to Teachers in Transition. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your previous teaching experience.
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I always wanted to be a teacher, even when I was little. I would take my play backpack and try sneaking onto the bus. I almost succeeded a couple of times. I always wanted to be a teacher. It was just a matter of what kind of teacher. And in high school, I realized that music was where that passion really was. So I went on to get my bachelor's degree in vocal music education from Millikan University. And then a few years later, I got my master's degree in teaching and learning with a concentration in ESL. The main reason I did that was because when you are a music educator, you see every student in the whole school. And so, needs are very diverse. And so you have to learn how to support that. So I debated going for special education or ESL, and eventually chose ESL to learn how to further support those students, as not every school has an ESL teacher or as many ESL supports for those L2 learners. So that's what I did to improve my music education experience and for my students. But then it also opened up extra doors where I started teaching elementary music education and STEAM as well as ESL. So I ended up teaching a lot of different things to a lot of different students, and no 2 days looked the same, which I really loved. But this past August, I did transition out of the classroom. I was already a published author before that, but I did it on the side. And obviously it was a hard decision, but with a newborn at home and all of the things going on in the world today, I knew I had to resort my priorities, and it ended up being the best decision for me and my family.
Very good. So you taught for 6 years, and it sounds like you had a variety of different experiences. So was it burnout as so much as your ability to already have something to move into? I'm just curious as to what your level of burnout might have been. It may not have been as high as some folks experience.
So before my most recent school, I was at the point where I was having panic attacks in the car every day before entering the building. A big part of that was there was an administration change. And so the admins were putting administrative tasks on teachers that they shouldn't have had to. So all of a sudden I went from the music teacher who already had less planning time than the rest of the school to suddenly I was in charge of student of the month. And suddenly I was in charge of decorating the library for events. And suddenly I was in charge of all of these things that were very clearly not my job. And then you add in the lack of support for student behavior and parent concerns. There was actually the breaking point for me was I ended up needing surgery. And one of the accommodations that I required, it was fairly minor surgery, but the accommodation I needed was until I was healed, I needed more frequent bathroom breaks. And as a teacher, you know that bathroom breaks are hard to come by. So my room was not in a place where there was like a partner teacher who could pop into my room or anything like that. So I had to ask admin, can you send somebody, literally 1 to 2 extra times per day. The bathroom was literally right outside my classroom, but I can't leave students unattended.
Right, of course not.
To give me this accommodation, and they never did. And so that was really stressful, not only mentally, but it was hard on my body and my recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
so I moved to a new school, and my new school was absolutely lovely. It was, the administration was great. The pay was higher. I was listened to a lot more. And what I learned was, even with such a drastic improvement, I was still experiencing a lot of the same things, maybe to a lesser degree, but I still had parents harassing me via email. One of them was a parent insisted that we didn't sing in music class. We sang in music class every day.
Of course you did.
But her kindergartner told her that we, so.
Maybe you just weren't singing the songs that kindergartner wanted you to be singing.
But her child would never lie to her.
Well, of course not, because 5-year-olds never tell fibs.
They never make things up. Yeah. So I just found that even though I was in a very good district, at that point, that was when the pandemic hit. And so it was a whole different ball game. It was a whole different stress level, and it was constant adaptation. You never knew what was going to happen. And even with all those supports in place, there was a point where they had me teaching music and being a full-time 4th grade co-teacher and tech support for students simultaneously. Great. So, that was like 2.5 to 3 full-time jobs.
Yeah. Well, and it's been my experience. I think I shared with you when we talked before that I have a large proportion of music teachers that I work with in my coaching group. And I think it's because music teachers have a tremendous load. They see all of the students pretty much every other day. They have few breaks. They're expected to plan programs for the holidays and for end of year specials. And so it's just a constant amount of work. And what you're describing, adding to all of that work and expecting you to have, to perform these other jobs, I can't imagine why you'd be responsible for decorating the library, for example. As the librarian, I don't know what I would think about having anybody come in and decorate my library. So yeah, it sounds like you were being asked to do way too many things and to wear way too many hats. And no wonder you were feeling the stress of that. And an anxiety attack, panic attack is a manifestation of stress and overwhelm. So tell me a little bit about how you became an author. What inspired you to start writing, and how did that journey occur?
Well, that's a little bit of a 2-part thing. I always had the ideas. Part of that was I've always been a bookworm, always, to the point where my mom actually as a child grounded me from books a couple of times. Now, granted, she was, as bad as it sounds, I was neglecting my other responsibilities. So, it was my fault. But outside, people always looked at that and they're like, I would kill to have my daughter reading that much. Why are you grounding her from a book? So I've just always had the creative side of me. I've always been a book lover. So I've always had these ideas. And one day my husband, who is a musician as well, but he's more of a songwriter, audio engineer. I don't write songs. He loves doing that. And he asked me one day what I've never done that I've always wanted to do. And I said, well, I've always wanted to write children's books. And he said, well, let's figure out how to make that happen. And I thought he was kidding at first, because I'm like, yeah, that's a dream. But he was like, no, there's got to be a way to do it. Let's see what happens. What's the worst that comes out of it? And so that's where the research started. But the ideas generated from my students. I've worked in a lot of low income schools, and many of the kids I worked with hated reading but loved music. And I'm a firm believer that there's a book out there for everybody.
Right.
And so it's just about finding the things that resonate with you and that excite you. So I was determined that, okay, if these students don't like reading, but they love music, there's absolutely no reason why we can't have some really great musical stories out there that fuse those worlds.
Mhm.
They loved things like Don't Push the Button and Don't Let the Pigeon Ride the Bus, and There's a Monster in Your Book. They loved jumping and shouting and yelling and turning the book upside down. And I thought, well, why can't that have a musical twist? I really wanted to encourage those kids to love reading as much as I did as a child, and also to be able to see themselves in picture books. I'm Puerto Rican, and so there's very few books with Puerto Rican characters out there. So I wanted to be a part of the solution in a lot of ways. So buckled down, did my research, and I learned that for my personality type and what I wanted to do, the self-publishing was best. Just because a traditional publisher wants guaranteed sales, they want stories that are low risk. And I was essentially inventing a genre. So I was very high risk. So I dove into self-publishing and made a lot of mistakes at first. But now I'm at the point where I get pictures and videos and emails of teachers in their classrooms and parents and students using my books. I even had a teacher come to me and say, a student who does not like music class, because of my book, was suddenly inventing their own rhythms according to their interests, which was dump trucks.
Okay, well, everybody has an interest.
Right. So, I mean, that's where it all started.
Well, there's so many nuggets in that story. First of all, I love that your mother had to ground you from reading books as opposed to taking away TV. But the other nugget there is that I think it's true for most authors that in a prerequisite of being an author is having to have a love of books and the written word in general. And most authors, I think, were prolific readers as young people, as children. So there's not necessarily, I guess, that if you weren't an avid reader as a child, if you have an idea for a book, that doesn't mean you can't be an author. But I think that there's probably a lot of similarity between your love of reading and how you became an author, and other authors who share a similar interest in reading as children. So you mentioned the difference between self-publishing and publishing for a company. You've done both, correct?
Yeah. So at this point, I do have an agent now, actually, as of last week.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
I am now represented by East West Literary Agency. So I self-published 10 picture books.
Mhm.
And in November of 2021, Disney actually reached out to me and asked if I would write their level 3 step into reading book for Encanto. And that was exciting because at that point, people didn't even know the movie was a thing.
Gotcha.
And it was crazy because if you've ever sat down and tried to explain the plot of that movie to somebody without any visual aids, it's quite confusing. So that was an exciting project, and I worked on that while I was in my 3rd trimester with my daughter, while teaching virtually in a pandemic.
Wow.
And yeah, so I did that, and then I wanted to pursue traditional publishing as well, but there are very big differences between the two. With self-publishing, you are the publisher. So you have to be an expert in the production. You have to be very involved. You have to, in the places where you don't have expertise, you have to hire somebody with expertise. So I don't illustrate. I can't draw to save my life. So I need to hire illustrators. I have to hire graphic designers and formatters to get the things done that I need to do. And then I also need to be an expert in marketing. With traditional publishing, they actually pay you. So self-publishing is expensive, but traditional publishing is free to the author. And in that case, you write your story, you query agents, and then the agent is in charge of selling your book to a publishing house. And then the publishing house handles the production. They end up paying you. A portion of that goes to your agent for facilitating the contracts. And that's pretty much it with traditional publishing. They kind of take the wheel and just check in with you.
One of the things you mentioned the other day, though, was with a traditional publisher, you also lose control of your content. Is that right?
Not completely, but because they're the ones that are funding the book, they're the ones taking the risk on you. You don't, it's not 100% of control, but all of a sudden you're collaborating. When you're self-publishing, it's 100% on you. With a traditional publisher, you have to work with them because they're paying out the money. So if 100% control is important to you, and it was for my musical picture books,
Right.
then self-publishing is best. But I also think it's important for people to realize that you don't have to commit to one route or the other. Even though I have an agent now, she's only pitching 2 specific unpublished books of mine. I'm going to continue to self-publish my music books alongside the traditional ones. So it's also important to recognize that not all books are going to be best for self-publishing, and not all books are going to be best for traditional publishing. So it's really about the individual person and the individual book and what works best for that scenario.
Gotcha. So I understand that you help other people become published. Tell me about that process and what you do to help.
Yeah, so I run a company called At Home Author along with Brittany Plumeri and Chelsea Tornetto, who are also elementary teachers. Brittany has turned in her resignation. She is leaving the classroom at the end of the school year. And Chelsea is planning on 1 to 2 more years, depending on how things go. But what we do is through coaching and courses and other free resources like YouTube videos, blog posts, and Facebook groups, we help other teachers, live the same dream and get their picture books published, which I think is important because teachers especially see a lot of gaps in literature, and they see where specific needs are for a variety of different children at a variety of different grade levels. So I do think that we need more teachers that are creating content because I think it will make such a difference.
What is your favorite part of writing books for children?
I definitely think it's seeing the impact. I'll get tagged in random Facebook posts, or I'll get emails from people with stories about their students or their child, or with pictures. And it's a surreal feeling. Sometimes I honestly forget that I'm an author because I'm still me. Nothing's changed about me. But seeing that something that you've put so much of your heart and soul and time and effort into actually making a difference in people's lives, in their classrooms, in their homes, with their kids, that's completely priceless. And that's the feeling that really drives me to continue creating.
I understand that feeling of gratification when you realize that something that you've created is helping someone else. I get that feeling. That's sort of how I feel about every time someone tells me I've listened to your podcast or I've watched your YouTube channel. It's like, oh my gosh, I put that stuff out every week. I have every week for 2 years next month. 3 years next month, because I started the podcast in 2019. And it's like throwing a pebble out across a pond. You just never know exactly where it's going to ripple away to. So tell us, for those teachers who may be out there thinking, well, I've got an idea for a book, but I still don't know how or where to start with putting the idea into. One other thing I wanted to say before we do that, the other nugget that I took away from your story is that your husband sounds like he could be a coach. That's what a coach does. A coach says, what is it that you're holding yourself back from doing? Why are you holding yourself back? What were you waiting for? What did you think had to happen before you could become an author? And he encouraged you to go for it instead of waiting for that magical, someday I'll be an author, someday I'd like to write a book. So kudos to him. He sounds like he could be an awesome coach for other people besides just you, possibly. And good for him that he encouraged you to go for your dream. So tell us, for those who might be listening, who might want help in getting their idea off the ground to figure out how to write and publish their own book, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, the easiest place is on social media or through the website athomeauthor.com, or on our social media channels, it's just At Home Author. We are constantly putting things on YouTube, blog posts. Our Instagram has tips and tricks as well. But those are the two best places to reach out.
Spelled out not the symbol, at author. So find Vicki Weber, 1B in Weber, Vicki with a Y. For those of you who might be thinking Vicki IE, it's Vicki with a Y and Weber with 1B at homeauthor.com. Find her, ask for her help. She's got a couple of options to help people get started and to help them to get published. And Vicki, thank you so much for being willing to be a guest on this week's episode. I enjoyed speaking with you the other day and thoroughly enjoyed hearing your story again today. Thank you so much for your time and sharing with my listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and have a good week.
You too.